Okay, good morning, class. Today, well, good afternoon. I think it's afternoon by now. So we are going to do a video about Nancy Hanks and the day's demand. So if you are on this lesson, please turn to page 329 in your literature book, page 329. And I will go over these two poems with you. If you've already done these, feel free to go back and check your questions, change them as needed. So go ahead and turn to page 329 and we'll get started. Okay, and first, Nancy Hanks. This poem is by Rosemary and Stephen Vincent Benet. And the question is, how would you answer these questions by Nancy Hanks? So let's read, starting with line 1. If Nancy Hanks came back as a ghost, seeking news of what she loved most, she'd ask first, "Where's my son? What happened to Abe? What's he done?" Now, one thing I want to make sure we address before we go no further is the idea of the ghost. As Christians, we do not believe in ghosts. We believe that when a person dies, their soul either goes to heaven or hell, depending on whether they have accepted Christ as their Savior. But in this poem, it's not a scary ghost or anything. The author is just using ghost to kind of symbolize Nancy Hanks and her love for her son and for her concern for what's happened to him since she has passed away. So that's all that's referencing. And then notice these 3 questions she asks about her son. She says, "Where's my son? What happened to Abe? What's he done?" So who is her son? Who do we know that has a famous nickname Abe? That's right, Abraham Lincoln. So this poem is about Abraham Lincoln's mom, Nancy Hanks. So she has this concern about her son since she passed away. So second stanza, line 9. "Poor little Abe, left all alone, except for Tom, who's a rolling stone. He was only 9 the year I died. I remember still how hard he cried." So again, we have the repetition of the name Abe. So just confirmation, this is by Abraham Lincoln. And he's left all alone except for Tom. Who do you think Tom is? If you said his dad, you're right. Tom would be his father. Tom, I'm sorry guys, Tom would be his father. And notice she describes him as a rolling stone. Your book over here, because remember your book on the sides will give you some explanation with that asterisk. Tells us that rolling stone means wanderer. So her husband liked to travel from place to place. That's kind of the idea of wanderer. He didn't stay in just one place all the time. He was only 9 the year I died. I remember still how hard he cried. So how old was Abraham Lincoln when she passed away? 9 years old. So most of y'all are 12 or 13. So y'all, if your parents passed away and you were 9, you have already lived 3 years without them. So it's just a sad thought that he didn't have his mom for the majority of his life. And she right here recounts how he responded to her death. He cried as any normal 9-year-old would do. It's just heartbreaking situation. And so she recognizes that about her son. So it's like a stanza 3. Scrapping along in a little shack with hardly a shirt to cover his back, and a prairie wind to blow him down, or pinching times if he went to town. So this stanza is telling us their poverty situation here. So scrapping along, we think of that poor people are just scrapping along, piecing stuff together. So we're trying to make ends meet. Modern day living paycheck to paycheck is how we would probably say it nowadays. In a little shack. So from what I remember about Abraham Lincoln's childhood, he lived in a log cabin. I think a 1-room log cabin. And so that's their little shack that they lived. They all lived in the same room. Hardly a shirt to cover his back, so they couldn't afford clothes. So all he had was a little shirt and prairie wind to blow him down. And that's meaning that he was just so skinny and so thin that anything could knock him down. And so the wind coming by would just knock him down. And that's probably because they didn't have enough food to go around. And then notice it says pinching times if you went to town. Pinching over here, your book tells us, means difficult. And so we can imagine that anytime they went to town, it was hard to find money to buy the things that they need, much less the things they wanted. Okay, let's look at the 4th stanza. "You wouldn't know about my son." Okay, she's talking to the reader right now, asking if you know her son. "Did he grow tall? Did he have fun? Did he learn to read? Did he get to town? Do you know his name? Did he get on?" Now, These lines are all ironic. Now remember, the word irony means opposite of what you think it means. Now, we know who Abraham Lincoln is. Anybody who's been in America for any length of time and taken any history classes knows that Abraham Lincoln was the 16th president of the United States. He led us through the Civil War. And so we, of course, know who he is. So that's ironic that she's asking these questions. Did he grow tall? Of course he grew tall. We all know that. Did he have fun? Well, we assume he did. Did he learn to read? Now, a little known fact about Abraham Lincoln, well, y'all probably know this, is he was self-taught from a very young age because his mom passed away. He had to help around the home and in the fields, I'm sure. So he taught himself how to read and write and all that fun stuff. And did he get to town? Well, obviously, if he became president, he obviously got to town. And we all know his name. We all know Abraham Lincoln. His nickname, Honest Abe. We know how tall he was. And did he get on? Meaning, did he make a name for himself? And oh yeah, he did. He's one of the most famous presidents we have. So that is Nancy Hanks right there. And how would you answer these questions? What do you think about Abraham Lincoln? There are a lot of different opinions about him and the way he handled the Civil War. And so whether you're for the North or for the South depends on how you would answer those questions. I'll leave that up to you. Okay, so let's look at the day's demand. Okay, so I'm going to try and get through this as quickly as possible because the last video I made for this would not load up. So let's see if we can get through this. Okay, God give us men. A time like this demands strong minds, great hearts, true faith, and ready hands. Men whom the lust of office does not kill, men whom the spoils of office cannot buy, men who possess opinions and a will, men who have honor and a will, men who have honor, men who will not lie, men who can stand before a demagogue and damn his treacherous flatteries without winking. Tall men, sun-crowned, who lived above the fog in public duty and in private thinking. For while the rabble, with their thumb-worn creeds, their large professions and their little deeds, mingle in selfish strife, lo, freedom weeps. Wrong rules the land, and waiting justice sleeps. Okay, so a couple of things. Notice who this poet is addressing in this poem. Is he addressing public? No. Is he addressing people? No, he's addressing God. Okay, he's crying out to God because he knows God is the one who can provide what he needs. And so he starts off with, God, give us what? Men. And not just any men. We need men who will do what is right in office, who will not be bought off by fancy promises, the one who has an opinion and a will to stand by that opinion. Okay, so also men who have honor, men who will not lie. We need men. He's asking God for men who will tell the truth in all things. Before a demagogue, now your book over here tells us that a demagogue is a leader who gains control by appealing to the emotions. We need a leader who will stand up to those people and tell them that that is lying, that these flatteries will not work, that we need to do what we are supposed to do, that we need to be honest. We need men who live above the fog, meaning live above today's opinions. And I love this line, in public duty and in private thinking. So we need men who are not hypocrites. We need men who are the same in public as they are in private. We have so many people today who put on a face in public and say we're going to do this, and that they love God and they want to do what's best for their people and that they are praying and supporting us. But in private, they're doing whatever they think is right, whatever they want to do. And they're not looking at God. They're not looking at what our desires are. So we need men who say they pray in public and pray in private. We need men who support God in public and support God in private. That's the type of leader that we need. And it says, for while the rabble with their thumb-worn creeds. Those lines are a little confusing. So over here it tells us rabble is the mob. Thumb-worn creeds is well-worn statements of belief. So this poem is up to this line is describing the man that God needs to send us. Starting at for while the rabble is describing the current state of events right here. So currently, in Josiah Holt Holland's days, the author, we have a crowd of people who are yelling at their beliefs at everybody, and yelling at them and saying what we believe is right, and their large claims, idea professions claims, and their little deeds mingle in selfish strife. So they're all fighting with each other, saying my idea is better than your idea. And he's saying while this is going on, freedom is weeping. Notice freedom is capitalized. They're personifying freedom, giving it a human characteristic. Freedom weeps. Wrong rules the land, and waiting justice sleeps. So does yelling at each other, yelling each other's beliefs, is that solving anything according to this author? No. Is that making laws that are good for everybody? No. It just creates confusion and strife and anger. And what this author is telling us, and what we know, what we need, is we need men who are honest, men who are true, men who will do what God has called them to do. And does this apply to us today? Yes. It's very applicable today. This needs to be our prayer, boys and girls, that the Lord sends us leaders who don't do just the things that they want done, but they think of their constituents, which means the people they serve. We need to pray for our president. We need to pray for our congressmen, that they stand up for what is right, regardless of the cost. Okay, guys, let's look at the questions that you need to do for each poem. Number 1, who is Nancy Hanks about? And what do you think is the major point of the poem? Number 2, list at least 2 hardships mentioned in the poem that Abraham Lincoln has to overcome. And you're going to find that in the 3rd stanza, that 2nd column. You'll find those hardships. Number 4, can you skip number 3? So skip that one, go number 4. Where in this poem can you find instances of anaphora? And those of you who have done the questions, you did great on the anaphora, but just remember, anaphora is repetition of words or phrases at the beginning of a poetic line. So you're looking at the beginning of the line, just repetition of those phrases. And then in the Holland's poem, what is the demand for the day? What are we looking for? You check the first line for that one. And then Josiah Holland lived in the 1800s. Is it possible to read the poem outside of that context? And if you look up here, the word context means the facts, events, or occurrences that surround a work of literature. So what that question is asking is saying that this poem was written in the 1800s. If I took that poem out of the 1800s and plopped it into 2020, would that work? And yes, it would. Does the poem, sorry, I just gave you the answer if you caught it. Does this poem apply as much today in 2020 as it did back in the 1800s? Okay, guys, I hope you have a good rest of the day, and we'll see you later.